Welcome back to week 2. I'm Todd with CFI Pro, and this week is probably going to be the second week, and the third week is probably the hardest to get through because we're going to be talking about things that you, one, are probably not interested in, and two, are kind of hard to understand the concept of. So over these next week 2 and week 3, what we have here is the fundamental of instructions and going into regulations. And this can be somewhat of a complicated thing to wrap your head around. And the main reason why is that when someone is not motivated to learn something, when someone doesn't have a real reason, that they don't think that they have a reason to learn something, they're not going to want to learn it. You know, I asked my wife, I said, you know what? I would love to take Spanish and take a Spanish course and learn how to speak Spanish. And she was like, why would you want to do that? And I'm like, you should totally take that course with me. And she says, no, I am not going to take the course with you. I have no reason to learn it. And what do you think, how hard would it have been for me to convince her from that particular point after she said that to me to get her to go take this? So if there's no motivation, if a person doesn't feel the need to learn something, they're not going to. And that is literally FOIs. That is FOI, the fundamental of instructions. And I don't know how much of a powerful thing that's coming across to you, Ed, but that's a pretty powerful thing for me. So when I'm working with my student, and let's just be very specific, I'm working with a CFI client, I got to find some way to motivate them to get interested in learning fundamentals of instructions. And wow, that's a difficult one to do that. But what I can tell you is this. You absolutely, positively cannot become a successful CFI without first understanding this. Can you do CFI work without understanding the FOIs? Yeah, a little bit. Sometimes you do it and you don't even know you're doing it. It like happens in the background of your conscious. You don't even know that you're doing some of the things that we do, but the things that you learn in this course will absolutely positively make you a better instructor. That I can 100% guarantee that will work that way. Last week we worked on putting our lesson plans together. This week we'll start working on our fundamental of instruction lesson plans. And I think that if you follow my guidelines and follow my steps, I think you'll see a purpose, which is important. And the second off, I think that you will see that there is merit in understanding this, and it's going to make you a better instructor, and it's going to make it where what kind of I think the most important thing on our mind right now is, Todd, how can I pass this check ride? It's like basically everybody's thinking that right now. Like, okay, get on with it, funny man. Let's get to the points about passing this check ride. Let's go, pick up the pace. Well, I can't do that. I have to take it one step at a time. But this week, when we do go over the FOIs, you will definitely see that there should be some motivational spot for you learning. Now, what am I going to do on this week in regards to this? Well, first off, I'm going to tell you how to go through the FOIs and how to do the research on it and how to present it. How to present it. Okay, how to present it. There are 2 ways you can present FOIs. So on the check ride, how do we present FOIs? Well, there are some examiners that may say, present this to me as if you are teaching this to a group of other pilots, which is so stupid to do that. Why you are, first off, let me tell you why that's incredibly stupid. According to the regulations, in FAR Part 61, it states that if you want to teach someone how to be a CFI, you must have been a CFI for at least 2 years. Does it make any sense at all, period, to be talking to the examiner in this check ride for something that you can't even do for 2 years past your check ride date? No, it doesn't make any sense. God, examiners sometimes, I just want to push them down or something. I don't want to say that. That's not correct. But they don't think right sometimes because it's such a subjective check ride. Like I told you, this is the most subjective check ride you'll ever take in your life. So which way should you do it? Well, you should be doing it in the way in which it's meant to be done. Which is, how will I use this information to make myself a better instructor? Pretty simple. You have something that comes up and you're like, motivation. What do I need motivation for? Well, if I don't properly motivate my student, they won't want to learn the information. Just like I told you a minute ago with my wife and her Spanish. So I still haven't took Spanish lessons, by the way. But I will one day. Just not motivated enough right now to do it, huh? Anyway, whatever. Bad comedy this morning. So let's just do this. Let's go through Area of Operation 1, Task A. And I'm going to do it a couple different ways. I'm going to do like a very quick, like all the way down very quickly, kind of show you how it's done. And then we're going to get into some more, this is specifically what it would sound like in the check ride kind of thing, but very abbreviated because 20-minute video per week is, trying to shove 10 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. So let's first off look at what it's asking for. Well, what I'd like for you to do now is I want you to take out your PTS. Now, I will put a copy of the PTS up on the screen here momentarily, and we can follow along with the stuff on the screen. But for now, if you want to just watch the first time and then come back again and get more depth and detail with your listening skills, approved as requested, you can do that. But for now, the first thing I want to go over is if you can take out your PTS and read along with me, or you can follow along on your screen. I'm at Area of Operation 1 in the PTS, and I'm actually going over single engine, by the way, so in case you're in a multi-engine PTS, I'm just going over the single engine airplane, Area of Operation 1, Task A. And there's a couple of things we have to know. We'll start from the top of the page, and you can see here on the top of the page it says the Area of Operation 1, Fundamentals of Instruction, and then there's a note. Now the note is very, very important because every single area of operation has a note. And this note tells you basically what we're going to be doing on that task. Early morning, I got to get my coffee in while I'm talking to my peeps. What does this note say? This note says, the examiner shall select task E and one other task. Task E and one other task. So first off, what do we know? We know that we're going to be asked E. So you better know E better than any one of these other tasks. You better know E. We know you're going to be asked this. Like, why would you not know this? If you fail this check ride, if you get a notice of disapproval on this check ride because of E, wow, you were really, really, really unprepared for this check ride. And you did yourself no justice by doing that. So please don't do that. Please don't do yourself an injustice and not look over what you need to. But then it says one other task. Well, if you look down through here, we have alpha through golf, which is 7 items. And so it's task A, task B, task C, all the way to golf. And we know they're going to ask E, but we don't know the other tasks, so we have to know all of them. So how many things are we going to be asked on Area of Operation 1 at a minimum? And the answer is 2. At a minimum. Could the examiner ask 3? Yes. 4? Yes. 5? Yes. All? Yes. But the PTS, if you looked over that stuff I gave you last week, you'll see that the examiner has to make sure that they do this check ride in a reasonable amount of time. And so the FAA says, yes, we understand that you're going to get this, if we asked every single operation, this check ride would take 3-4 days. And we need to get it done in a very small condensed period of time. So they put the notes in here and they give the examiner the leeway to ensure that they understand what they're talking about. Well, we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that clause. So it says task A, human behavior and effective communication. That's the next line down. And then it says a reference. Well, what is that reference? Well, you probably already have it. If you did what I asked you to last week, you probably took it to the Office Depot and had it bound, or FedEx or whatever, and had it bound. So the FAA-H, which means handbook, 8083-9, that is your aviation instructor's handbook. And the information that we're talking about today for area of operation, for task A, it comes from chapters 1 and chapters 3 of the aviation instructor's handbook. How do I know that? Well, because they're labeled accordingly. The chapter 1 is called human behavior, and chapter 3 is called communication. So, or effective communication. So it's not like I'm reinventing the wheel here, folks. It's all at your fingertips. I'm just trying to point you in the right direction. Then it says the objective. The objective is to determine that the applicant exhibits instructional knowledge of human behavior and effective communication and how these impact effective learning by describing, there you go, and it gives you a list of elements. Very important to understand. What are those called? They're called elements. Very, very, very important to understand. They're called elements. Let's go back over to the objective just a minute and see what that objective says. To determine that the applicant exhibits instructional knowledge of human behavior and effective communication and how these impact effective learning. And how these impact effective learning. We don't even know what learning is yet. How can we talk about how these impact effective learning when we don't even know what learning is? We don't even talk about learning until chapter 2 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, which is Area of Operation 1 Task B, which we haven't got to yet. It's the next one. It's called the learning process. You can see that in your PTS there. So, when we're talking about these elements, 1 through 7 here on the PTS, we have to talk about how these impact effective learning. So, I'm trying to learn the very best that I can. Are there things that may inhibit that process? Yes, well, that's basically everything within Task A. Pretty simple. If you didn't have somebody guide you through it, it probably would not be simple. Now, if you remember what we talked about last week in the PTS, it says the applicant shall demonstrate mastery of the elements. Mastery of the elements. What does that mean? Well, you know what mastery means. We talked about that. Mastery of the elements. Well, there's 7 elements, and you must be familiar with each one of these elements, is what it's saying. The first element, the definitions of human behavior. Okay. What must you know first? Well, you must be able to define human behavior. There are, in the handbook, there's like 5 definitions. Just pick one. There's one in particular that I love because it allows me to kind of go into the next topic area. So, and we'll talk about that as well. I like to take each one of these elements and play them on the one previous before it. Like, if I'm looking at the elements here, number 1, definitions of human behavior. So I would give the definition. And then on number 2, it says human needs and motivation. So the definition that I like to give on the first element is the attempt to satisfy certain needs. So if I were giving this to an examiner, this is how I would do this. I would say, all right, so today I'm here to talk to you about human behavior and effective communication. And what we're going to concentrate on in this lesson today, and I'm going to piggyback off the objective here that's in this, is how these items can impact effective learning of my client. So that's my opener. Which kind of gets me in the door with the examiner, like just kind of starts the flow with the examiner. You know, like just to kind of let them know, I know what's going on. I have prepared. But because we're not always going to be teaching this to the examiner, you may actually have to teach this to someone one day. You probably want to have a better opener in regards to getting someone's attention. So if I don't understand what drives someone, how would I be able to help them achieve their goals? And if I can't effectively communicate or talk with my client and understand what they need and what they want and be able to transfer back and forth information, they'll never learn properly. So today's lesson that's what we're going to talk about. And that would be like my opener to a human behavior and effective communication lesson. So then I would go and talk about element 1. So this is definitions of human behavior is an attempt to satisfy certain needs. Now I want to tie that line in to the next line. I want to create a bridge between topics. How can I bridge myself between what I just said right into the next topic? Well, the next topic says human needs and motivation. And this has got to do with Maslow's hierarchy. You may or may not have known that already. But this is what Maslow said is the basic needs that a person must have in a first world country to satisfy what they're shooting after, their goals, what lies at the heart of a person's goals or what they're trying to reach. So if I'm trying to reach a specific goal in life, like I want to be an airline pilot, okay? So what do I got to do to get there? Well, I've got to follow these goals that I'm going to set out for me, and if I don't satisfy these goals in a specific order, I can't get there. But then before I can even satisfy the first goal, I've got to satisfy things that are kind of like in the background, and they are these needs that we're talking about. So if I said my opening line was that learning has many learning has many definitions, and one of them is an attempt to satisfy certain needs. What needs? What are these needs that we're trying to satisfy? And this is where I would actually go into the element number 2. I go, well, we don't have to figure them out because someone's already done it. So Maslow created these sets of human needs, and it says that we have to satisfy these in order of importance. And I would list the hierarchy of needs from the bottom of the pyramid all the way to the top. And I would talk about each one of them as it relates to an aviation student. Like, for instance, if I said the very base core need is physiological needs. You ever been in an airplane and had to go to the bathroom? Are you concentrating on anything else except going to the bathroom? I don't think so. I don't think so. And so will the learning that you're trying to do, that you're trying to achieve, will it be hindered based off that? Yes, it will be. You can't concentrate on anything else. Your need that you have is to learn how to take off and land. How can you learn to take off and land and listen to an instructor if you've got to go to the bathroom really bad? And so I'm trying to play off each one of these elements as it relate to an aviation student. And I think that's the best way for 2 reasons. 1, you want to show the examiner that you know the information. And 2, you need to be aware of this as a student, as an instructor. Why? You kind of got to be like, well, I don't think it's like this anymore, but when I was growing up, and mommy and daddy would put us in the car, put our children in the car, and we would start out on the road trip. And my dad would be like, you better go use the bathroom now, because when we get in that car, we ain't going to stop. And it kind of makes me kind of think about how I want to let my students know. Just, hey, today's flight's going to be about an hour and a half long, and I know we've just started flying together, so you don't know what it's like to go out there and do this hour and a half lesson. So it would be a good idea before every lesson to make sure you go to the restroom one last time, just to make sure that you're good, and that we don't have to get in the airplane and have any issues there. We have to come back prematurely. That's how you have that conversation with your student. That's how you handle that. You have to talk with them. And we're going to get to the effective communication in a minute. But you got to talk to them. Otherwise, they won't know. If you don't tell your client, they won't know. And so after the needs, I would let them know, and I'm still on element number 2 here. Then I would go into motivation. I would define motivation. And, why a person does what they do, why a person is trying to do what they do. And once I do that, I can tie in the third element. The third element has to be defense mechanisms. But I can't just go directly from motivation, just right on over to defense mechanisms. There's got to be some type of correlation, some type of application in between these particular elements. And I don't know, how do I know what that is? Well, first, if you go read the book, it'll tell you what the transition is between each one, what the bridge is between one. I call them tie-ins. I got to tie in element number 2 with element number 3. How am I going to do that? How do I tie in element number 2 with element number 3? Well, I said, here's human behavior, here's a definition based off certain needs, here's the needs, and here's why somebody would be motivated to accomplish those needs. So here's my tie-in. You ready? I'm about to say my tie-in. Here it goes. But along the way, your student is going to have a ton of reasons as to why they're not achieving what they need to achieve. And we call these things defense mechanisms. And then I would talk about the defense mechanisms. But that's my tie-in, my bridge to go from element number 2 to element number 3. And then I would talk about the defense mechanisms one at a time. So the most common one is called denial. And we all know what denial is. That's a river that runs through Egypt. And I'm just joking. And then we go through each one of them and talk about each particular defense mechanism and how it relate to the student. Like, what would it look like if my aviation student was suffering from or had a defense mechanism such as fantasy? What would it look like? I see people in class, and I'm talking to them, a broad spectrum of people, anywhere from 4 people to 30, over 30 some odd people in a class, right? And I'm looking around the room, as I'm talking, and blah, 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 and I'm talking about aviation, I'm talking about fundamentals of instruction, and you happen to catch some person, they're back there in the back, and they're like, and you're like, what are they thinking? What are they thinking in their head? And they could be thinking something like, white shirt, got my epaulets on. There you go, pre-flight, I'll be out there. Instructor. Black tie and epaulets. Yep. And they're thinking to themselves, how cool is it going to be, man, when I become an instructor and I'm out there and now I'm the boss. I get to ride right seat and get paid. Hey, because everybody loves to get paid and fly. And so I would go through all of the defense mechanisms with the examiner and would have a good way of allowing the examiner to know that if I saw these defense mechanisms with a student, that this is how I would correct him as an instructor. And then I would have to find some way to go from element 3 to element 4. So I'm talking about defense mechanisms, and now I have to talk about his student emotional reactions. Flight training in itself it's a very difficult task to do. That is the reason why we have only a very, very less than, oh my God, it's a small, very small percentage. I think the number is 0.00048% of the population are ATP rated pilots. That's just all the ATP rated pilots. So I'm an ATP rated pilot, but I've never flown for the airlines. So we got to see what's the percentage of that that are ATP rated that doesn't fly for the airlines that are airplane. Of course, that number is airplane. Only about 174,000 ATP rated pilots in the United States. So I've went over the defense mechanisms with the examiner. I've told the examiner how each one of these things would apply to my student and how I would correct it. But I have to create that bridge now, that tie in to go from element 3 to element 4. Element 4 says student emotional reactions. How many of you watching this video thought that at some point of your training was very emotional for you? Me, I did. I thought it was. I had a lot of things going on when I was training. And there was a lot of stress. At some points, there was a lot of anxiety. And so I must be aware that if I had these stress, it's a pretty good odds my student would have that same stress or those same anxieties. So I, as an instructor, must be able to be aware of those and learn how to deal with stress and learn how to deal with anxiety. And then I would talk to the examiner about that, each one of the items that are listed in that. And then I've got to find a way, once I do that, then I've got to find a way to transition from 4 to 5. So this is the transition that we make. So as you finish on element 4, what you're going to see is that you're at the end of chapter 1. And so 5, 6, and 7, that's all going to come from chapter 3. So we flip over to chapter 3 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. And it talks about basic elements of communication. So how do I make that bridge to go from element 4 to element 5? The way I do that is pretty simple. I simply just say, now, of all this stuff I just talked with you about, what's going to make this really, really difficult is if I don't know how to properly communicate with my student correctly. And as we start to learn how to better communicate with people, because as an instructor, you got to talk to people, there are some basic core items that we have to talk about on communication. And then I would talk about the source, the symbol, and the receiver as defined right there in the second page of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Those are the 3 basic elements of communication. Acronym SSR. And after I finish that, then I would have to transition from element 5 to element 6. Well, how do I do that? So I've told about the basic the basic elements of communication. And now I would say something like, but while I'm trying to communicate with my client, there may be some things that would actually be a barrier to me trying to effectively communicate with my client. You can see I just almost read completely off number 6 there. And these are the things that bounce back. Like I'm trying to get that information in there, but there's a bounce back. So I created an acronym called Coil. Coil, the bouncing back off, the coil bouncing back. And so then I would go into talking about confusion between the symbol and symbolized object, overuse of abstraction, interference, lack of common experience. That's Coil. And those would be my barrier to effective communication. After I finish talking about that, then I have to transition from 6 to 7. And I'm in the home stretch. I'm right there at the final home stretch. I just got to get this last one out of the way and I'll be done. So again, I have a very special way of teaching people things in which I like to blend in comedy and I like to blend in things that really kind of relate to normal activity. So what do I say on this one? Well, on this very last one, I have to talk about developing communication skills. Now the acronym of the items that are listed in section 3, you can make an acronym. Excuse me, I don't think it's directly gives you an acronym, but it's LIQIR, and that for me spells liquor. And so what I do is I say, now what has always helped me in my communication skills? Well, a little liquor has always helped me. And that's the acronym that's going to help me get through this. And then I can say, the more that I become a teacher and the better I become a teacher, I'm actually going to learn better ways to make this information more understandable. So the things I just did, Coil and LIQIR, Better Communicator, all that stuff is literally number 7. The things that's in number 7. Me finding a way to better talk to you, to communicate with you, to get the point across, that's number 7. And I would go through and I would talk about all the different instructional listening, instructional enhancement, questioning, instructional communication. I would go through all that stuff. And then I'm done. So all I've got to do now is wrap it up. Well, how do we wrap it up? Well, we're going to wrap it up by going back and talking about the objective. So today, we've talked about a lot of information here and how all these information impact the effective learning of my clients. And if I am more self-aware of all these elements that I just talked with you about, it will better help me to understand how my student learns and what they're trying to achieve, and I can help them achieve that. I can help motivate them, and then how I can better communicate with my client along the way. That would be the end of the lesson that you would present, but you're not finished. You did one of the items. The first item that you had to do was give the conclusion, which I just did. Then, out on the table, when you give any lesson, you're always going to have 2 things out on the table. Always 2 things. You're always going to have your lesson plans. So here's my lesson plans. And you're always going to have on the other side of the table your PTS. Always. There's always going to be lesson plans, PTS. Okay? 2 things. At a minimum, 2 things. Lesson plans, PTS. So after I've done the required items in the PTS, and I've done it by way of my lesson plan, then I would come over here and I would look at my lesson plan and I would say, to the examiner, I would say, just 1 second while I look over my lesson plan. Let me make sure I'd discussed everything with you. I'm looking down. Yep. And at least make the attempt to look down like you're actually reading it. You're probably going to be really nervous, have a lot of anxiety, and really won't be reading anything. But just look down and make sure you covered everything. I definitely recommend you just kind of brief down through the elements just to make sure because if you left anything out, now's the time to correct it. So you look down, you say, in conclusion, blah, 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 blah. Let me look over my lesson plan and make sure I discussed everything. And then you're going to look at the examiner and you're going to say, do you have any questions? And now you're going to give the examiner time to kind of go and go over any information that he feels that you were deficient in, or maybe have any questions. You know the good thing about this? It's actually a pretty gloriful thing, by the way. This is pretty cool. Most examiners out there, they don't have a clue about this stuff, man. They haven't looked at this stuff any more than you've looked at it. And that may benefit you. Because they don't make a habit of studying the FOIs, they're just like, yeah, whatever. We need to get through this so we can get to the next point. There is no part of the DPE process to become a pilot examiner in which the FAA sits down, or any person from the FAA sits down with you and says, let's talk about the FOIs. It doesn't happen. So you can kind of use that to your benefit a little bit, but Murphy's Law will dictate that if you do, the person that you go and have an exam with is going to be a master of the FOIs, and man, it's going to really come back to bite you. So what you should probably do, just know what you're supposed to know. Do what you're supposed to do. Know what you're supposed to know. Know the information. Know your trade. Most of you have between $60,000 and $100,000 wrapped up in your training already. Please, 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 please know your trade. You're getting into something that you'll probably never get out of for the remainder of your life, so just know it. You have to You need to know it. Don't sacrifice these small things in an attempt to try to rush through your training. You've got 8 weeks with me, folks. You can post your comments right down at the bottom, and I'll answer them. You can ask questions right here in this thread, and I'll be right there with you for the next 8 weeks. It can be done. It's just going to take a little time. Hopefully this has helped you today. I'll have every one of these tasks taught on my Patreon channel. If you'd like, the link is down below to my Patreon account. I will give very detailed videos on my Patreon account on each one of these tasks, task alpha through golf, which I'll post throughout this week. So it's not all of them going to be posted tomorrow. Nobody would watch them all tomorrow. They're going to be posted throughout this week. And so that way you can go over the FOIs and don't have to cram everything in. Thank you very much for joining me today. For CFI Pro, I'm Todd Shelnut, and I would love for you to subscribe, like this video, click on that bell for future notifications of any more videos that I post, and for please, please, please spread the good news that there's someone out there that's trying to help you become a better instructor. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you next week.